Thank you, David. Thank you to Tamara and the Little Hoover Commission in general for, yes, thank you. And to Sienna, and for just in general being willing to listen to our sometimes ranting and raving, A, because we're very excited and very passionate, and B, because there's a lot to be done. So we're here to, and actually we've got a little bit of a surprise guest. Our executive director, Aaron Snow, happened to be in San Francisco this week, so he is here with me and is going to do the second half of the presentation. But we're here to tell you what is basically a story of what happens when you get a few people who are very excited about a very strong mission. They want to have an impact. You give them a little bit of air cover and what they can get done. So a brief history of 18F. 18F started in the seeds of an idea from several people, mostly kind of in and around the White House, that wanted to take the basic, the thesis statement was, can we get people, technologists, people from an industry, from the private sector into government for short rotations, and maybe just, we'll start with just 6 to 12 months, see if we can get them to take sabbaticals, get them into the federal government so that we can start raising the, what Megan Smith likes to call the TQ, the technical quotient, get the technologists back into government and helping make decisions, helping just deliver things, because that in and of itself is going to move things along. So in 2012, Todd Park, Steve Van Rokel, who was at the CIO at the time, several folks in the White House started this program called the Presidential Innovation Fellowship. And Innovation Fellows were essentially, again, bringing those technologists into the government for short tours of duty to work on projects that had impact, that had the potential to save lives, save money, fuel job creation, and generally just make the government a little bit better. Some of you may know, some of you may not know. I wasn't really clued in, but the White House doesn't exactly have a large budget to sustain some of these really awesome ideas that they initially come up with and seed. So in its second year, the White House, Todd Park, partnered with GSA, the General Services Administration. The administrator of the GSA at the time was a man named Dan Tangerlini, who was just totally bought in on this idea, really wanted to start thinking about how could we get small teams in to start just noodling on ideas and delivering small projects and see what could happen. So they brought the Presidential Innovation Fellowship into GSA. So they created a program office, and it is now managed inside GSA. And it was after that second year, and just a side note, the GSA, again, in case anybody doesn't know, is kind of like the operations arm of the government. They have two main business lines. One is around acquisition, so helping agencies procure and buy things from pencils to tanks. The second thing is around building management. They're kind of the landlord for most of the federal government. Most government buildings, about half at least, are sort of owned and leased by the GSA. We are the tip of the spear for a third line of business that they are really trying to invest in, just around doing the same kind of service provision for the rest of the federal government, but around technology. So in 2013, there was a class of PIFs that, that's the acronym, Presidential Innovation Fellow, the PIFs. We were the second class of fellows. We were finishing up our 6-month fellowship, and a few things happened. One was just, we weren't quite done. I mean, that really at the end of the day was myself, Aaron, about 6 or 7 other folks, just didn't feel done with their time, with their tour of duty. I will confess, we hadn't really delivered on the project that we wanted to get done in those 6 months, so we wanted to kind of keep going. We wanted to keep pushing. There was a website that was in the news a lot right about that time, which sort of catalyzed a lot of conversations. It finally gave us not only a playbook for how we can get ourselves out of those situations, but it really kind of cauterized this vocabulary that everybody now was speaking around agile and user-centered, and things coming out of stakeholders' mouths that we didn't necessarily have to put there anymore. And there was also a government shutdown, so we had time to sort of actually step away from our day-to-day work for a couple of weeks and rally around this idea of how could we get a team. They wanted to, at the time they were trying to build a team of perma-PIFs, folks inside the agency that could catch these projects that were coming out of the fellowship and other things, work with GSA, work with other agencies on projects that could be potentially impactful. So it was sort of this lightning in a bottle moment, honestly, where we were just in the right place at the right time. And at the end of our fellowship in December, 18F, which wasn't exactly called 18F at the time, but 18F was born. 18F is a digital consultancy. In a nutshell, that's the way we have come to describe it. It's a digital consultancy inside the government, for the government, specifically for the federal government. We are federal employees. We're employed by the GSA, and we work alongside other federal employees in agencies to help them deliver on their missions, on their impactful projects. You know, the key there is that once we got, I mean, you know, especially during my fellowship, and we hear this all the time from PIFs and folks who come and join 18F and USDS, once you're in government and you start working with those program managers that are out there and have amazing ideas and are trying to execute on it, but are either hitting bureaucracy blockers or just people blockers, you know, they don't have the staff, you start to realize that it's not that the government doesn't have good ideas and doesn't have things that they you know, can't get done. It's just literally that they're hitting some of these blockers. So 18F became the place that we help agencies execute on their missions and get some of those amazing ideas done. And this is our team. This was at our last offsite. We dropped a little map in there just to sort of, in case you're wondering, 18F is our little homage to 30 Rock. The headquarters of the GSA are at 18th and F Street in Washington, D.C. So over the last 2 years, since December of 2013, this has been our North Star. This is the mission that we are striving to execute on every single day, that we will help the federal government fundamentally transform how it builds, how it buys, how it shares technology and digital services. And we do that primarily through these sort of core tenets, through agility, through a user-first mentality, and you know, always shipping, which means producing code, pushing code live, getting it in front of users, and just consistently that being the theme, that we want to get this stuff out there, get it in the hands of people, get it in the hands of users. Mike Bracken, who started the GDS, the Government Digital Service in the UK, once wrote and says over and over again that the strategy is delivery. And the important thing, really, in all of this is to just do something. Simply start. Prove yourself with a minimum viable product, an MVP, a minimum viable project, something, anything to start proving the case that you've got people willing to engage, willing to, you know, you're willing to listen, you're willing to keep iterating and improving on what you're building, what you're doing. We plan to use these sort of lean startup methodologies: build, measure, learn, always be learning, always be shipping, always be improving. We knew we were going to do that with our products. That was sort of baked into the Innovation Fellowship program. What I think we learned really fast was that these same things apply to everything that we do. The first thing that we did was use these principles on ourselves. We had to MVP our team, we had to MVP our practices and our processes, our hiring strategy, everything. To figure out how a small, agile team like ours kind of fit in this big behemoth of a bureaucracy, not only just called the GSA, but called the federal government. So we identified the first two biggest hurdles were definitely going to be hiring and secure deployment, just literally getting websites, getting code in front of people, in front of users. Building our startup inside the federal bureaucracy, first and foremost, kind of meant by integrating with it. And you know, these things, if you take a look and if you're familiar with agile or lean startup principles, they might sound fairly familiar. You have to, first and foremost, have a stakeholder, have someone willing to go along the journey with you. You have to engage them early and often. You have to have an MVP. You have to have that minimum test case, that minimum test product that you're willing to learn from. You've got to get that actually in the hands of actual users, get them using it, keep learning, keep iterating. And then these last two sort of came to us just by hitting those walls of bureaucracy, which is you've got to stay aligned with it. You've got to know how to work with it. Sometimes you do need to root around it, and that's kind of working with it. You have to learn where the pressure points are and what you can do and quote unquote perhaps get away with, because what you're doing is you are sort of resetting what people know and what people think. Because if you can go back and prove, no, Agile is not illegal, no, the cloud is not illegal, you now have precedent. And then you want to formalize all that stuff that you learn. Formalize it, formalize the process, and just keep reusing it. The results have been, as you might imagine, fairly impressive and fairly remarkable. So this was us at our first offsite. As I mentioned, there were about 8 fellows that joined with a couple of really talented bureaucracy hackers inside the GSA at the end of 2013. By March, we had already jumped to 15 people. By July, we were, I think, at about 40. September, this is when the next class of innovation fellows joined us. January of this time last year, we were at about, I think probably at about 90-ish. And then this year this was our last all hands in September. There were 150 of us joined together. And currently we are a team of almost 180 people that are really focused on product delivery and product consulting and helping folks, again, figure out what their true problem is, what the crux of the issue is that they are trying to solve. The folks that you see on the screen are designers, they are engineers, they're product managers, they are strategy consultants. We started out very focused on delivering product, on building services. So as our recruiting focus was pretty much focused on engineers, designers, user researchers, UX folks, and content writers, writers being just a fundamental piece of the whole picture, not only for getting our story out there and the outreach side of it, but for being able to effectively communicate with all the folks that we were trying to get to use the things that we're building. So that's what we started with. Today, as a consultancy that does a lot more than just building services, we have a host of design thinking, acquisition, change management specialists on the team as well. And we are also, which is I think of note and unique in many ways, is that we are a distributed team. We are not just located in Washington, D.C. The 180 folks that work for 18F are in D.C., New York, Chicago, Dayton, Austin, Tucson, Seattle, Atlanta, Chapel Hill, San Diego, Lawrence, Kansas, and the list kind of goes on. And we have 35 people in San Francisco, that's right. So that's a little bit about kind of how we've grown and what we focused on in the early days. Again, this is our North Star. It's our first order mission. It guides the decisions. It guides really everything that we do. And in order to deliver on that mission, I've sort of picked out about 5 pillars that we stand on. The first is, be the change. Be the change that you want to see in the world. But honestly, it is about leading by example. It's about taking people through the journey with you, because perhaps it's going to be their first time. It'll be the first time that they've done a design studio. It's going to be the first time that they've participated in user research sessions. All of those firsts are incredibly impactful and are the heart of the change that we are trying to seed and build throughout every agency that we work with. Because what that does is, after they have an experience like this with us, showing up to sprint planning meetings and retrospectives and going through those processes for the first time, is it resets the expectation. It resets the baseline. And now suddenly they have those same expectations for the next vendor and the next group that they work with, whether it's us or not. We have a huge focus on design, just the fact that you have to design an experience. You need to think like a designer. It's not just the designers that are responsible for this, by the way. It is, in fact, the entire team. Everything we do has a relentless focus on the user, on the people that are going to be using the system, on the people that are going to be processing the transaction at the end of the day. We have situations where, especially kind of in business development, where an agency comes with an idea. They think they've got it really fully baked. And we say, that sounds like a pretty cool idea. We're going to go do research. We're going to go talk to the contracting officers that you say are going to be using this system. and and pitch it to them and find out if they think that this is what they need and that this is what they use. In fact, one of the things that we built for a sister team inside the GSA, we took the idea, talked to 15 or 20 contracting officers, and they said, yeah, I can see why the program manager thinks that would be a good idea, because it probably fits in with his view of the world, but in terms of what we do day to day, every single one of them told us that it wouldn't really fit into their workflow. But they told us that what they really need was ... In this case, it happened to be a market comparison tool that would be most helpful, and that was a million miles away from what the program manager thought his system, his team needed. So we took the research back to him and said, we've talked to folks, and we don't think that what you want to build is going to get used. So respectfully, we're going to pull out of the project unless you want us to build this, because everyone we talked to said they would use it. He was a wise person and said, that sounds great, build that. But so anyway, just that's a story to sort of illustrate that that the user needs are what are driving our decision. We're backing that up with data. Again, we're doing research. We're trying to pull out the analytics to support all of those decisions that we're making. We're measuring as much as we can, not only about the products that we're building, but about ourselves. API first, I think it's worth calling that out because, again, we want to do more than just build websites. It's not about getting a functional, usable website in front of a user is important. But at the end of the day, one of the things that I've come to sort of think about and realize is that as government, being inside the government, what might be most important is laying the plumbing, is laying the foundation, is putting APIs out there that then, yes, our team can go and build on top of. But so can the market. The market can then determine what services should be built on top of that. But as government, the things that we can do are make the data available, make the pipes run and clear and working. So we absolutely build services and we build transactional services, but we do have an API first mentality so that we back up and we say we're going to get this in place first. Not only because you can see what everyone else is going to do with that data or with that service, but it also helps us, it gives us kind of a baseline now to build on top of. Agile practices, I've sort of used that word, lean startup several times already. Not necessarily a capital A Agile shop. If you've read capital A Agile books, we use many of those methodologies, and our teams kind of have the ability to choose sort of what pieces of that work for them, but fundamentally, we are quote-unquote sprinting. We are working in 2-week cycles. Every 2 weeks, we check in with the stakeholder, with the program manager, and we say, does it feel like we're on track? If not, do we need to switch? Do we need to keep going? Do we need to back up? Do we need to do more research? We try to build in those small feedback loops, not only with stakeholders, but with the users. So again, those research sessions. We don't just do user research at the beginning, we do user research along the way. So that hopefully we're failing small. We are, we're failing early and often so that we don't have a big failure, months or years down the road. And finally, we took a very clear stance from the very beginning that we are open by default, that we are going to be an open source team. If you Google 18F open source team, you can read our sort of treatise, our blog post when we launched our open source policy. That goes into it quite a bit, but at the end of the day, we are working in the open. Our code is on GitHub. Every little thing that we build is available to you, the American people, to go and check it out and play around with it, not only because that is fair and how it should be, but also because, Mike Magursky's in the crowd, and he might go check something out, and he might find a bug that we didn't see, and so then he can submit that back to us. And that makes us better, makes our code better, makes us, more secure. So that transparency, we also evangelize it. It's a huge part of how we work and how we talk about ourselves, but also we build it into our agreements. So the 18F way, I sort of started by saying it was kind of a combination of people and practices having impact and culture. We are a hub. What is 18F? We're a hub. We are a hub of core capacities, a group of very, very talented technologists. And one of my colleagues quoted, sort of came up with the phrase, we're impact junkies. We're all here, we're on a mission just to make government a tiny bit better. for our partners, the folks, the agencies that come to us to help them solve their problems, to help them think about it from a new angle, to help them sort of crack this nut in a new way. 18F, I think represents change. We are a new way to approach things and to get things done. And with that, to dig into the business side of things a little bit, is 18F's Executive Director, Aaron Snow. And we give you a little bit of Silicon Valley and a little bit of DC.
Right. Okay. Yeah. All right. Good. All right. The business side. So, hi. It is a pleasure to be here, especially given that we're doing some exciting work specifically with the state of California through the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services right now. So I'm really thrilled to see this, and I have been following Little River Commission's work through Hillary for some months now. 18F is currently configured into 5 units of business. There's a unit that does custom partner solutions, that works with agencies on a specific problem that they bring us. We need help solving X. We need to build a new service for Y. And that unit does web service delivery. That is to say, we build stuff. It also does consulting and design experience engagement. There's a second unit called Products and Platforms that builds things for all of government to use, shared services. We don't use the phrase shared services because there's a certain amount of weight and angst around that phrase in some corners of government, so we prefer to talk about platforms. But that unit is there to create new platforms for all of government to consume and then to spin those out eventually into their own programs to stand up by themselves. The third unit is more specifically aimed at not helping an agency solve a single problem, but when an agency, typically an agency CIO shop, comes to us and says, we want to build a little 18F here at the agency. We want to change how we think about all of our digital application problems. Then we engage in a longer, a longer and thicker engagement in helping the agency transform how they do all of that. And that involves teaching and demonstrating all the things that Hillary talked about, helping the agency get over the humps that they need to get over in order to go open, helping acculturate the teams all over the agency to the idea of working agilely, helping understand the difference between user-centered design and stakeholder-centered design, and so on. The fourth unit is a specialty unit. We call it acquisition services. Sometimes we call it AC Ops. And this is in recognition of the fact that there is a very distinct and separate set of competencies and bureaucracy hacking that needs to go on, specifically in the procurement space when it comes to IT. That is our fastest growing unit at the moment. It is often the first place agencies want to go because they are used to, for the last however many decades, agencies have typically done most of their IT through procurement. And so there's a certain comfort factor with starting there. And so that unit is building marketplaces to help connect open, agile, user-centered vendors with that agency community. It's also engaging in what we call RFP ghostwriting, about which more in a little bit. To help agencies write RFPs that bring them the kind of vendors and the kind of success that we think they can achieve. And then lastly, we have a unit centered on education, assets and platforms and services, so-called 18F Learn unit, which Hillary heads, which is aimed at doing the outreach and the evangelism and the education across the board for everyone in government, because our fundamental working theory is we call ourselves a digital services organization. We say that we're here to help the government do a better job of building, buying, sharing digital services. We are, I think, in reality, a change management office disguised as a digital services office, and our real goal is to help everyone learn how to use 21st century rods and reels when they fish. So this is the unit that is providing the full stack of of appearances and videos and audio and events and materials, guides, playbooks, handbooks, cookbooks that help agencies get comfortable with and understand how to step by step move through processes that they are not yet used to, not yet comfortable with. So, our growth has been somewhat remarkable. We started with 10 folks in December of 2013. March of 2014, there were 15. As Hillary said, we're now up, I believe that 18F, not including the Presidential Innovation Fellows, is up to about 165. With the fellows, we're at about 185. We've signed well more than 100 separate agreements with our partner agencies to do work for over 40, I think 44, 45 different agencies at this point, and growing, including all but one or two of the 24 so-called CFO Act, the big agencies. Some of the examples of what we're doing. I'm going to come to the first one last. I'm going to talk about cloud.gov for a sec. Cloud.gov is a great example. One of the, as Hillary said, there were sort of two fundamental bureaucracy hacking problems that we faced very, very early on. One was how do we hire at speed and get fantastic talent into government rather than going through the typical federal, like 6 to 12 month hiring process, which leaves most of the sort of top level talent way behind. The other was how do we not just secure but certify as secure web services that we develop so that they can actually be opened up to the public. That is, go live online. There's a process for that. You need what's called an authority to operate, an ATO. That is a typically very lengthy, expensive process. It was taking on the order of 6 to 14 months or more for typical projects, and that's after a code freeze. And a code freeze for 6 to 14 months is simply incompatible with our notions of continuous deployment and continuous change. And so we started building out bureaucracy hacks for moving through that process faster, and that has brought us to a service that we could not find with a vendor, which is a full pre-certified deployment stack, which we call cloud.gov, which when agencies use, they can know that everything from the metal all the way up to the operating layer and tools layers are all pre-certified, pre-okayed for public use, so that all they have to do when they write an application is make sure their application code gets secured, and that's a much faster, simpler process. This has helped us reduce deployment times from many, many months to, in some cases, as little as a couple days. Let's see, the Agile Delivery Services Marketplace. So we heard very loud and clear once we started talking to agencies about developing digital services that one of their top problems was, well, how do we get vendors that will work this way? Because we send out our RFPs with our 100-page specs, and we get huge bids for 3 and 5 year cycles with waterfall plans, and they're quite expensive in many cases. And as a result, we decided to go ahead and try and create a marketplace to connect vendors who work the way we work with agencies. And the result is the Agile Delivery Services Marketplace, or the Agile BPA, as you may have heard or seen. This is going to sound silly, but it was, in fact, we think the first time it was ever done that in order to compete to get into this marketplace, the vendors did not have to write dozens of pages telling us all about all the things they've done before with the federal government. Instead, they had a very short form application, but had to submit live code to an open source repository online with a live URL showing us working code. It sounds like the smart thing to do, right? And the vendors had never seen this before. And they reacted incredibly positively. The vendor day that we held to describe this about a year ago, when we kicked it off, was the largest attended ever in GSA's history. The vendors were and are terribly excited. In part, we had a fair number of vendors coming to us and saying, we've been working this way with our private sector clients for many, many years. We're so excited that someone in government wants us to be part of the change. Some of these other projects are websites you can go look at, analytics.usa.gov, which has now been, that source code has been replicated and reused in several cities and states to help those entities expose their usage data the same way that we are exposing the usage data across all of the federal websites that carry our analytics. The college scorecard and Every Kid in a Park are great examples of working with agencies to solve targeted problems. I don't have time to talk about all of these. All of these projects are projects that you can read about online on our blog and in other places. We'll come back to the child welfare system at the very end, I think. All right, how we operate. We don't rely on appropriation like most other groups. One of the reasons we've been able to grow as fast as we have without a ceiling is that we're funded out of a revolving fund that the GSA has that is used for acquisition services and explicitly meant to include IT-related services to provide to the government. We're required to plan toward cost recovery, which we do. And the way we do this is we're fee for service. Every time we work with an agency, they pay us for the service, for the product, for whatever it is we're providing them. We do this by entering into what's called an interagency agreement. Obviously, the government can't contract with itself, but the IAA is the next best thing. These IAAs are not, they do not look like typical contracts. They reflect our values. We start with a broad statement of objectives. We focus on our user needs. We talk explicitly in the agreements about working in a sprint-based fashion, about working agilely, about the level of involvement that we're going to require from the product owners on the agency side, from working in the open. And they can quit us anytime they want on 30 days notice. And frankly, we can quit them too. We haven't had to exercise that clause yet, nor has anyone exercised it on us. But it is of a great amount of comfort to know that we are in a space that is typically large dollar, large bet, high risk. We are very low dollar, low risk with an easy out if you don't think it's going the right way. We can't turn a profit. We're not supposed to turn a profit. We don't want to turn a profit. We just want to recover the costs that it costs us to operate. And so we base our hourly rates and increasingly fixed fees on how much it costs us to actually do the work, including our overhead. So like I said, we charge hourly rates for most of our projects at the moment, although we've been moving a little more toward cost estimated based fixed fees just because they're a little more reliable and easy to understand over time. So benefits. We thought that being a fee-for-service organization within government was going to be a tough road. It turns out to have a lot of benefits. First of all, as I mentioned, we're not capped by an appropriated amount of money per year. We can grow to meet whatever the market demand is. So if there are more agencies willing to put up more money, we can continue to hire people and grow and serve as many of them as we're capable of doing. Our ceiling is not money. Our ceiling is how fast can we grow without flying apart at the seams, and we manage that very carefully and pay very close attention to maintaining our team culture and operational health. We find that the best customers are paying customers. When agencies have to engage to the level of signing on the dotted line and committing money to us, they get a different level of involvement, a different level of understanding. They know they are signing up for something that is not their usual thing, and so they pay some attention, and they ask a lot of good questions, and they get comfortable with it before they sign, instead of trying to simply sort of walk in and be something very foreign and different where they get very uncomfortable very fast. And this plays to our theory of change. We're not changing agency behavior by forcing them, by telling them, you got to do it this way, because we find that when that happens, sometimes the result is simply a patina of agile without actual agile, what my predecessor liked to call agile fall or agile fail. When the agencies are engaged, and they see that we are delivering every 2 weeks, delivering research, delivering prototypes, delivering wireframes, delivering product. They understand the value of the method, and they are bought in. This is our theory of sustainability. It's fairly simple. If we recover our costs and we provide quality service, the market is going to understand our value very clearly, and we think that's been borne out. And obviously, having to be cost recoverable keeps us quite accountable to all of our clients. It also helps us with a very blunt, simple measure of how well we're doing internally. we think that an 18f.com would not have seen that kind of success. I'm going to wrap up in just a sec. I think it's important to note that having somebody on the inside who's in your court, who is aligned with your interest, who has the credibility with you, an agency representative, of also being a government employee who's been through the wars and has access to all of the government partners and services that vendors can't, that all of these things and the recruitment cachet of being able to do what we do at scale, all of these things are reasons why an inside government organization is uniquely well positioned vis-a-vis vendors that you might try to bring in to execute on the same kinds of things. So feel free to ask us about all of these things. I'm out of time, and so we're going to have to, our project with California's child welfare system is going to have to wait for another moment. But if you've been reading it all online, you can read about what we consider to be an incredible opportunity that born out of serendipity right here in Sacramento, and we're terribly excited. So I'm told I'm out of time, so I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to pass it back to Carol. Thanks very much for having us.